But this is the type of stuff that men or women don't understand. Is the first consideration for everything you do is not how much you're doing or how often you're doing, it's how you're doing it. So I don't care what you do until I see how you do it. So if I can improve how you do it, think of it like, everyone talks about progressive overload being a king, and most people think of progressive overload as the amount of weight on the bar, the number of reps. It's not. The first opportunity for progressive overload is quality, right? So first you have to qualify before you can quantify. So if every rep looks the same and you optimize your quality score, then progressive overload becomes king. But if your reps are kind of sloppy, and as you get tired, do they look the same or do they look worse? Do you go faster or slower? That's a completely different game. I don't know if you guys talk about exercise like this on there, because sometimes I'm talking fast.
Well, we're gonna go into a lot of detail today around that. So maybe you can give a couple of other examples of. So we do talk about progressive overload, but I do like the idea of quality before quantity before we're progressing.
Yeah.
What are some other examples of progressive overload? So it's not just weight on the bar, but it can be volume. Like this.
So here's an example that I use all the time. If I'm just going to use easy numbers, not necessarily relevant numbers, but easy numbers.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm using a 100-pound dumbbell in this hand, right? And I'm doing a 100-pound dumbbell press. I know it's not, or 10 pounds, we'll say, for women's.
You can use 100, that's
just
fine.
Just for round numbers for simplicity.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm doing a 100-pound dumbbell press. And my hand, say if I'm doing a shoulder press, my hand stays directly over my elbow, or bench press, my hand stays directly over my elbow. The relative, and it stays consistent throughout the rep. The relative distance of that distance from the joint that I'm working, which is the shoulder joint in this case, stays the same. As I get tired, what do? I slowly bring it in. So let's say I do 10 reps with my hand directly over my elbow, and I go, okay, that was good. I'm gonna go to 110 pounds or whatever relative increase, 10%. So I've increased the weight by 10%, but here's what I do. Watch my hand. I do this. So I bring the weight closer to my body. So I've decreased the distance from the shoulder. Let's say I decrease it by 20%. So, if we measure this distance as 12 inches or 10 inches, and I bring it in by 2, I've actually decreased the amount of load that my pec is doing. So people think force equals mass times acceleration in the body. Everyone talks about force production. Well, force production, there's nothing in the body that works in a straight line. Everything works around an arc. So when you think of an arc, then you have to consider the distance. The distance is enormous. So distance is a really big part of the equation for force, torque in this case.
The other thing I notice is range of motion starts to shorten.
Well, the first consideration for most people is distance, and absolutely range of motion. We can talk about that in a moment. But so if your distance becomes less, you're doing less work. The easiest way to think of it is if I hold the weight like this,
right,
I can hold it there all day. If I hold it here, same weight.
So the moment arm is different now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But people just don't get that. And if you start to understand the moment arm, then the opportunity is enormous to isolate specific things. Then you're correct in saying, well, every muscle in the body is going to be substantially weaker in its length and in shortened range. So most people go, well, I'm not good there. I can't do as much there, so I'm just going to avoid it. And then we start to generate these strength disparities, right? So I become really good in one position, and I become really weak in another. Guess what happens then? I become tighter. Because my body goes, well, I can't go there. And that's where a guy who, can bench press 500 pounds can't put on his seatbelt. He can't even reach over to get on his seatbelt. It's not because he's tight, it's because he's weak. He's literally not able to externally rotate or whatever the motion is to get into that position to put on the seatbelt. It's literally weakness in that position. So the body tightens up. As you know, the body tightens up in response to weakness. So if we can not allow them to be as proportionally weak in those positions, they are less likely to hurt themselves, less likely to lose the range of motion and maintain more athletic capabilities. So it's like exploring those end ranges. And it doesn't have to be with significant amounts of load in the beginning. It's like, what can you control? Mm-hmm. Let's see what I can control. So for people at home, like the first consideration should be quality. And quality means if I said stop at any one, call it millimeter or centimeter aspect of the range, could you stop? And could you say that, hey, the muscle I'm actually training is doing work in this position? Because most people move through exercise trying to do as little work as possible, right? Because that's what your brain's meant to do. But we want to actually do as much work as we possibly can. So the goal isn't to just do reps. And the best analogy is, how many people out there read a book a week? Huge amounts, but they get to the end of the book and they go, I don't know what I read. So like exercise is like reading a book. Like, do you actually take that information and benefit from it? Or you just get to the end of the book and go, I don't know what I read.
Right.
So are you reading the book to read the book, or are you reading the book to get the information? So exercise is the same. Are you doing the exercise to actually get the benefit, or are you just doing it to be able to say that you went to the gym and you exercised? And I would say 9 out of 10 people that I meet are going to the gym and not getting the benefit from the exercise. They're more just going to say that they maybe feel better when they leave, which is wonderful, but they're not actually going to see the benefit or the full benefit of exercise because it's hard.
Yeah. One of the other things I've heard you talk about, and actually my previous coach, I was saying to you before we started recording, I'm sort of in between coaches right now, but one of the things that she would say to me is make every inch count. Or for our Canadians, every millimeter count, right? So how do we, so kind of building on what you were talking about in terms of quality, maybe another, and maybe you might agree with this or not, but is another way to, let's say, progressively overload is to stop taking breaks. Like, for example, at the squat, at the top of the squat, there's not much work that's being done there, right? But if we're able to maybe stop just before the leg is fully extended and then go back into the next rep, is that something that you
maybe
think
so
about?
again, remember you said you have conflicting goals. So
I do have
and I
conflicting
don't
goals,
think they're conflicting. So let's say strength is a goal and muscle building is a goal. So if my goal is strength, then if I'm taking 3 to 5 seconds or 10 seconds between reps, but my goal is strength, doesn't matter. If my goal is hypertrophy, then I want to be considered, which is muscle building, then I want to be considerate of generating the 3 mechanisms of hypertrophy. And like, how am I stimulating those 3, which is tension, damage, and stress, right? Metabolic stress.
Metabolic stress, yeah.
So which one am I trying to do? And those should be not necessarily opposing, but distinct. So you can absolutely get stronger and build muscle, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have to happen at the same time. Does that make sense? So I could get stronger without getting bigger, for sure.
I guess maybe I'm a little confused by that, maybe the premise that muscle strength and the amount of muscle that you have are not corollary to each other, because
They don't have to be.
They don't have to be.
Right.
Okay. So I've always learned that they're not the same metric, but they often are so closely tied together that you can really interchangeably look at strength as a proxy for muscle.
Well, but think of a 90-pound Olympic weightlifter who's doing 400-pound squats or 400-pound clean and jerks.
Right.
It's not correlated, right? Could it be correlated? Yes, but there's when muscle building, there's a nutritional component, there's a time component. Strength, it's exclusively power, right? It's like power and speed, force production. So it's not necessarily correlated. So you can get strong without getting big. You probably can't get big without getting strong. Does that make sense? It's like if you're building muscle, you're getting stronger, but you can absolutely get stronger without getting bigger. And I think a lot of women want that. They're like, yeah, I want to be strong, but I don't want to be huge. And I think a lot of women can't separate that in their mind. They're like, I'm going to get stronger. Oh no, that's bad. I'm going to put on 2. I'm going to look bulky. No, not necessarily. Your bulk is going to come as a result of your nutrition, primarily, your aerobic fitness, how much body fat you've got. Like, all those things are completely separate considerations.